Neuqua Connection. I'm your host, Gabby Golab, and today we're here joined with Wendy Elgis. So, Wendy, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Gabby.
So, you used to be the former executive producer of NBC. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I didn't start as an executive producer. I started as a writer, which means that I sat in a little edit bay with an editor, and the producer would tell me, write these 4 or 5 stories for the 10 o'clock news, and that's what I would do. And then after a few weeks, actually, I would fill in as a producer. It was about Christmas time and people were taking vacations, so I got to fill in on some shows and be in charge as a producer of my own newscast. And then I quickly became the weekend morning producer, which sounds great. I was in charge of my own shows. I had a lot of creative freedom, but I went to work at midnight on Friday night and midnight on Saturday night. And we worked throughout the night so we could go on the air at 6 a.m. And then I worked as a producer for a few years, and then I became executive producer. And I was the executive producer for the morning news at NBC for about 10 years. I did the early evening news for a little while too, but primarily the morning shows. And when I started, we only went on at 6 a.m. That was as early as news was. And then it was 5:30 and then 5. And then I was there as executive producer when we launched 4:30 news, and then a godly hour, 4:30 in the morning. But people are up, and people want to know what the weather's going to be and a few news headlines. So it was great. They gave me creative freedom and said, here's an entire half hour, design, do whatever you want to do. It's your half hour, and so we called it Barely Today because it was so early in the morning. And we just had so much fun. We would show crazy, kooky videos from the internet and play music that we wanted to, and we would tell the news. But we had a lot of fun with it too. We did a weather wheel, and so Andy Avalos, the weather guy, had to spin the weather wheel, and whatever it landed on, he had to do. Like he had to do it all, and he used to imitate Bill Clinton, who was president back then. So he'd have to do the weather as Bill Clinton, or he'd have to stand on one leg, or he'd have to do it as Foghorn Leghorn, or he would have to do all the weather in 30 seconds. And it was just it was fun. It was whatever we wanted to do.
So can you tell us the difference between being a producer and an executive producer?
So a producer, you're in charge of a newscast. You decide this is what people are going to watch on TV today. These are the stories that I think are most important. These are the stories that we can tell later. You're in charge of an entire block of news, whether it's a full hour or just a half hour of news. And you work with reporters who report stories live or maybe in studio for your show. You work with the writers. You tell them these are the stories I want you to write. And then you work with the director. I always say that the producer builds the plane, the director flies the plane. And so you're in charge of that time period. And you may go on at exactly 4 o'clock, and you have to be off the air at exactly 4:30. So you also have to time the show when you're in the control room when the show's live on air. So it's a job for someone who's extremely organized and doesn't mind being the boss and doesn't mind telling people what to do. And you also have to have a good news sense because it's your news judgment that's going on TV. Those are the stories you decided were news. When you're the executive producer, you're the next level up. All the producers work under you. You're in charge of all the producers, all of the reporters, all the writers, the stagehands, the people who run the cameras. You're in charge of everyone who contributes to that show is under your watch. And you have the ultimate authority. And much like being a producer, if something goes wrong, no matter whose fault it is, it's on you. So you have the ultimate responsibility for all those people and everything that they contribute to the show.
So how long did you work this job for?
I was at NBC for 23 years. So I was an executive producer for probably like the last 10. So like I had mentioned before, I did lots of other jobs working my way up.
So what motivated you to choose this career path?
Well, I went to Mizzou and I wanted to study journalism, I thought. And when you go to journalism school, depending on your college, you have to pick a sequence. And once I got to Mizzou, by my sophomore year, you had to choose, do you want to do magazine, do you want to do print, do you want to do newspaper, public relations, TV? And I really didn't want to do any of those things. And I thought, well, what do I want to do? Well, I love my English classes. I love my history classes. Maybe that's what I should major in. So I actually switched colleges. I went to Indiana University. I changed my major to English and history. But then I started getting internships in the summer. I worked at a local CBS station in Indiana one summer. I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. I love the newsroom, this chaotic energy. And it was so exciting and so much going on. And it was a lot of fun. And I thought, yeah, this is what I want.
So what was your first official job involved in the news?
My first job was at a CBS station in Indiana, and believe it or not, one of my first responsibilities when I went to work is I had to go in the wintertime up to the roof, and we had satellite dishes. and you can point the satellite to certain coordinates, and that's how you get your video in. So you'd get video from what was going on at the White House or Washington, or a plane crash in Russia, or whatever was happening in the world outside of our little town in Indiana. That's how we would get our video in, from these satellite dishes. So my first responsibility is, in the wintertime, I had to go up to the roof and take a big squeegee and get all the snow out of the satellite dish. And so I would say to my boss, I don't really think this is my job. This isn't, I went to college and I'm a news producer now. And they said, do you want video for your show? Well, then this is your job. So every day I have to go up and squeegee all the snow out of the satellite dish on the roof. That was the beginning of, of what I had to do. So my first job was actually in the promotions department. I would write short little promos, watch the rerun of the Ellen Show today on Channel 5, and I would find a little clip from the show. That's what I did first for a few months, and then I became a noon show producer. So my very first experience producing news was producing a noon newscast in Indiana.
So at NBC, what are some daily routines or activities that you do every day there for this job?
Well, the first thing, most newsrooms always start with the morning meeting. And we were taught early on that you go to the morning meeting with your notebook, which means here are all the local stories that are going on, you have that written down, the national stories, health stories, entertainment stories, things that are happening in pop culture, maybe what's trending on Twitter, the big national stories. So you go to the morning meeting prepared. That means that you've already scoured Twitter and Facebook, and you've looked at your news websites, you've watched the morning news, you watched the 10 o'clock news the night before. You have to be someone who is curious and someone who's interested in what's going on. You can't show up to the morning meeting, I don't know anything, I just woke up. Not acceptable. So everybody goes to the morning meeting, this is what I think is going on, this is what, I think, this is a big story today, and then we assign our reporters, you're gonna do this story. Gabby, the mayor's coming to town, you're gonna go talk to him, or there's a big fire, Rob's gonna go cover the fire for us, and we assign all the reporters their stories, then we decide what shows those will go in. Not every single reporter can go to the 4 o'clock news, the 4:30 needs some, the 5 o'clock, the 6 o'clock, so you have to spread out all of your reporters. And then the producers go back to their desks and decide, well, what else am I gonna do? I've got Gabby in my show, I've got Rob in my show, what else am I gonna fill this show with? And you look for news, and the reporters and the photographers are sending back video throughout the day. Then the writers come in, you assign them their stories, and you just work. You work on building your graphics and designing the show, designing the plane, as it were, and until it's news time. Then you go on and you do it live on air. And that's when a producer is in the anchor's ear. They can hear us in their IFB, and your job when you're on air is to keep the show to time. Like I said earlier, when you start right at 4, you end right at 4:30. You can't go over that time or less than that time. Right at 4:30, something else is going to come on, whether it's Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune in the next newscast. So then your job is to keep the show on time. Sometimes the weather guy wants to talk longer, or the anchors think they have something clever to say and they want to ad lib, but you have to keep everything organized and keep everything to time.
So what would you say the best and worst thing about this job was?
The best thing about TV news is just when you think you've heard it all, something crazier happens, something more outrageous happens. There's never a dull day, especially in a city like Chicago. There's so much going on. And every day's a clean slate. You come in and your rundown is empty and it's fresh, and you get to start from scratch every day. There's really no carryover work. Also, when you go home at night, you're done. The news is over and you walk out of the newsroom. You don't have to really go home and prepare and do stuff, because how do you really prepare for the news? You don't know what it's going to be. So that's probably the best part. The worst part of the job is probably the same thing, because you can work all day. You guys know what it is to write a package or work on a story or do a newscast or do this interview, and you prepare for it, and you've spent all day writing and thinking and editing and designing and talking to everyone, and then something happens. A huge fire, an explosion, all the power goes out in the city of Chicago. You scrap everything you've worked on, just forget it, you're not using any of it, and you're starting fresh. And sometimes you're going on the air in 30 minutes or 10 minutes, or it's while you're on air and you just have to go by the seat of your pants. It's also fun, and it can be exciting, and that's where you really learn if you have any skills or not to be in this business. But it's tough.
So what would you say to someone who wants to go into this field?
When I was in Louisville, Kentucky, we had this news director, and he made us take a pledge. And the pledge was, trust no one, assume nothing, don't be a victim, chart my own destiny. And that's so true, I think, for a lot of jobs. Don't trust that the reporter is going to use the soundbite that was really good. Go make sure the reporter is using that soundbite. Don't assume that your lead story is going to make it. Make sure that they're on deadline. Go see. Is it going to be there? Are we good? Can I do anything to help? Chart your own destiny. Decide what you want to be and go for it. Be ambitious. Tell people, this is, I really want that job, or I think I could do this. And don't be a victim. No boss wants to hear, well, it was somebody else's fault, it wasn't really my fault, I'm sort of a victim here. Make sure nobody makes mistakes on your watch. Don't be a victim. So that's really good advice, I think, for anybody in any job.
Okay, so thank you for joining us today at Neuqua Connection. That's all the time we have. I'm Gabby Golab, joined with Wendy Elgas.